At its peak, Jet Airways flew around 124 aircraft. It once held 44% of India's domestic market in 2004, and on the 7th of November 2024, the Supreme Court of India ordered it liquidated for good. Think about that gap for a second. This was the airline that beat everyone, India's first big private full-service carrier, the one that defined what flying inside the country was supposed to feel like. By the end, it couldn't afford the fuel to put a single plane in the sky. So how does an airline that owned nearly half of India's skies end up unable to buy fuel for one flight? Here's the thing, Jet didn't collapse overnight, and it didn't die from one bad year. Something turned a clear market leader into a liquidation case, slowly, over more than a decade. There was a mechanism, a chain of decisions and pressures that fed on each other. And the strangest part of the whole story? Everyone could see it happening, and no one managed to stop it. This is how it actually unfolded. Go back to the beginning. In the early 1990s, India was opening up. Decades of state-controlled economics were giving way to liberalization, and for the first time, private airlines could compete in skies that had belonged to government carriers. Enter Naresh Goyal. Jet Airways began scheduled operations in 1993, one of India's earliest major private full-service carriers in this new era. It wasn't a budget experiment. It was built to be premium from day one. According to some accounts, the company was incorporated back in 1992, growing out of Goyal's company Tailwinds, which reportedly started life as an air taxi operator before becoming a full airline. What mattered was the ambition. Goyal looked at a market dominated by the state and decided private India deserved something better: cleaner service, newer planes, the feel of an international carrier on domestic routes. He was the bold first mover, and for a long time, that boldness looked like genius. But the model he chose carried a hidden cost. Full-service flying means more staff, more cabin classes, more amenities, more of everything that passengers love and accountants fear. Every seat had to carry a heavier burden of expense. At the time, it looked like the smart way to win a premium market. Later, it would prove to be the exact weight that dragged the whole airline under. For years, though, none of that mattered, because Jet wasn't just surviving, it was winning. By 2004, Jet Airways looked unbeatable. Its domestic market share hit around 44%. Let that sink in. Nearly 1 in every 2 domestic passengers in India was flying Jet. No private rival came close. The machine behind that dominance was a classic full-service network carrier, a hub-and-spoke model anchored at Mumbai and Delhi, funneling passengers through major bases and out across the country and the world. Multiple cabin classes for every kind of traveler, loyalty programs to keep the frequent flyers coming back, and a mixed fleet of narrow-body and wide-body jets, growing toward that peak of roughly 124 aircraft. This wasn't just a domestic player anymore. Jet was flying international routes, carrying the flag of private Indian aviation abroad. From the outside, it looked like a permanent fixture, and then came the vote of confidence that seemed to seal it. Etihad Airways acquired a 24% stake in Jet Airways, a major Gulf carrier, putting real money into the Indian airline as a strategic investment. On paper, that was validation from the global industry, a signal that Jet wasn't just big at home. It was a serious international name with a powerful partner behind it. So here's the question that should be nagging at you. If Jet owned 44% of the market in 2004 and a global airline was buying in, how on earth did that share start to crumble? Here's the catch. The very thing that made Jet feel premium and powerful was about to become its single greatest liability. Because the game was changing underneath it, the premium model that built Jet Airways became a millstone the moment low-cost carriers changed the rules, and in India, they changed them fast. Think about what a full-service airline has to pay for: multiple cabin classes, meals, lounges, loyalty perks, a higher cost base baked into every single flight. Now put that up against a low-cost carrier flying a single-class cabin, stripped down, lean, built to undercut on price. Enter Indigo, enter SpiceJet. The low-cost competition rose hard, and Indian travelers, many of them flying for the first time, often cared more about the fare than the frills. Jet was selling an experience, its rivals were selling a cheap seat, and in a price-sensitive market, the cheap seat won a lot of arguments. Then there was the environment Jet had to operate in. India's tax and cost regime was brutal for airlines. High state-level taxes on aviation turbine fuel, steep airport charges, navigation fees, all of it stacked on top of the airline's expenses, and all of it magnified Jet's exposure when fuel prices swung. A premium carrier with a heavy cost base in a country that taxed flying hard against rivals built to fly cheap. That's a vice closing from every direction. Jet did respond. According to some accounts, the airline rolled out a multi-brand strategy, launching budget-style sub-brands like Jet Lite and Jet Connect to fight on the low-cost battlefield. The logic seemed sound. If passengers want cheap, give them a cheap brand and keep the premium Jet name for those who'll pay more. At the time, that looked like a clever hedge, a way to have it both ways, but it never fixed the real problem. You can launch a budget label, you can't easily strip out the underlying cost structure of a full-service airline that's still carrying all that weight. The sub-brands didn't transform the economics, they just added complexity on top of a cost base that was already too high for the fares the market would bear. So the squeeze kept squeezing, and to keep growing through it, Jet reached for the one tool that would eventually destroy it. By 2007, the strategy had a new ingredient: debt. Expansion financed by borrowing turned every shock into a threat to the airline's survival, and the clearest example came that year. In April 2007, Jet Airways acquired Air Sahara, reportedly for around 1,450 crore rupees. On the surface, it was consolidation, swallow a rival, grow the network, build scale. But the acquisition reportedly added cost and added debt to a balance sheet already straining under that premium model. And the debt didn't stay still. By some accounts, Jet's borrowings climbed sharply after 2005, rising from around 2,631 crore rupees that year to reported peaks of over 14,000 crore rupees. The figures vary by source, but the direction never does. Up and up. By 2012, the airline's net worth had reportedly turned negative. The company was, on paper, worth less than nothing. The losses tell the same story. Reports suggest Jet began bleeding money from 2008 onward, with only a brief return to profit around 2017 and 2018 breaking the run. More than a decade of red ink, papered over by borrowing. And that's the trap. When you fund growth with debt, you don't just owe money, you become fragile. Every fuel price spike, every weak season, every economic wobble hits an airline with no cushion left. The bank financing that kept Jet flying also left it utterly exposed to any liquidity shock. So now we can answer the question from before: why did the leader shrink? Because the cost trap, the low-cost squeeze, and the mountain of debt all pulled in the same direction at once. By the end of 2018, Jet's domestic market share had collapsed from that towering 44% down to just 15.5%. The airline that ruled the skies in 2004 was now a shrinking shadow. And a company this deep in debt needs a lifeline. Someone has to hold the rope. The real question was whether anyone would actually pull. By December 2018, the slow bleed was turning into a free fall. In months, everything that had been creaking finally snapped. Reuters reported that in December 2018, Jet Airways had defaulted on debt payments to a consortium of banks. A default like that doesn't stay quiet. The share price slid, confidence cracked, and the airline's troubles were suddenly headline news. The lenders moved. On the 14th of February 2019, Jet's board approved a lender-led rescue plan. The idea, as reported, was to convert the airline's debt into equity, issuing roughly 114 million new shares and effectively handing the banks control as the largest shareholders. It was meant to plug a funding shortfall of around 85 billion rupees. On top of that, Jet was reportedly seeking some $840 million more from shareholders and a government-backed fund. Read that plainly. The banks were trying to swap the money they were owed for ownership of the airline, then pour in even more cash to keep it alive. But rescue came with a price, and that price was the founder himself. In March 2019, Naresh Goyal stepped down as chairman and from the Jet Airways board under pressure from lenders as a condition for their continued support. The man who'd built the airline from nothing, who defined private Indian aviation, was forced out of his own creation. He and his wife resigned as the lenders moved to take control. The BBC framed it as the end of an era. It was. And while the boardroom drama played out, the most basic problem of all was getting worse. The bills weren't being paid. Reports indicate that on the 5th of April, 2019, Indian Oil Corporation halted fuel supply to Jet Airways over unpaid dues. An airline that can't buy fuel is an airline counting down to a stop. So the rescue was approved, the founder was gone, the banks were in charge. Everything was supposedly in motion to save it, but the rescue couldn't outrun the clock. By April 2019, the plan and the reality were running on two different timelines, and reality won. On the 17th of April 2019, Jet Airways suspended all of its domestic and international operations. Not a few routes, not a temporary pause, everything. The entire airline simply stopped. The reason was as brutal as it was simple. Without emergency funding, Jet could no longer pay for fuel and other critical services. No money meant no fuel. No fuel meant no flights. As Aviation Week's analysis laid out, the lack of emergency funding fed straight into the inability to keep the operation running. The airline's own words, published by NDTV, said it plainly. Jet was, in its statement, compelled to cancel all its international and domestic flights. Compelled. As if it had no choice left at all. Because it didn't. So remember the question, who holds the rope and will they pull it? Now we have the answer. The lenders, the people with the power to keep funding the airline, chose to stop. The emergency money didn't come. The rescue approved on paper in February never delivered the cash that mattered in April, and without it, the whole structure that had been propped up by borrowing for over a decade finally gave way. A premium giant, an Etihad partner, a 124 aircraft fleet grounded by an unpaid fuel bill. But being grounded wasn't the end of the legal story. The planes had stopped. The question now was, what would happen to the wreckage? By June 2019, Jet Airways entered its long legal afterlife, and it would drag on for more than 5 years. The airline was referred to the National Company Law Tribunal for insolvency proceedings, with the State Bank of India acting as lead creditor. This was now a bankruptcy case run through India's Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the framework enacted in 2016 to handle exactly this kind of corporate failure. Reports placed the referral on the 17th of June 2019, with debt of around $1.2 billion hanging over the carrier. SBI's chairman, Rajnish Kumar, called the NCLT referral a last effort to find a resolution. Those words carry weight, a last effort, the acknowledgement that everything else had already failed. But here's a detail most people miss. India's insolvency code wasn't really built for airlines. It handles companies and their assets, but it doesn't directly address aviation-specific things like airport slots and bilateral flying rights. Those needed separate regulatory and judicial clarification. So Jet wasn't just a bankruptcy. It was a bankruptcy in a category the law hadn't fully mapped. And yet, for a while, it looked like there might be a comeback. A resolution plan led by the Jalan Kalrock Consortium was approved during the insolvency process. New owners, a revival plan, the dream of Jet flying again. But the plan was never successfully implemented. The promise on paper never turned into planes in the air. Eventually, SBI reportedly petitioned to set aside that approved plan and seek liquidation instead, arguing the terms hadn't been fulfilled. The fight went all the way up. And on the 7th of November 2024, the Supreme Court of India ordered the liquidation of Jet Airways, overturning a prior NCLAT decision that had favored the consortium's plan. That was the end, not a revival, not a sale, liquidation. Over 5 years after the last flight landed, the courts decided there was nothing left to save. And that finally closes the whole loop. The mechanism beginning to end. A premium cost base, a low-cost price war, a mountain of debt, a liquidity shock, a rescue that arrived too slowly, and a legal process that ran for 5 years before ending in nothing. Now zoom out, because Jet's fall isn't really a story about one airline. It's a recurring shape in Indian private aviation. Jet didn't collapse in isolation. By some accounts, its failure fits a broader pattern alongside other Indian carriers, like Kingfisher Airlines, which collapsed in 2012, and Air Deccan before it. Different airlines, different leaders, but a familiar set of forces: cost pressure, debt, and a punishing policy environment. In 2019, Indian outlets covered Jet's closure alongside the deepening crisis at Air India and framed the two together as signs of something systemic, not bad luck, not one rogue executive, a structural problem in how the industry worked. And this is where the politics gets tricky, so let's be careful. Critics argue that the absence of a bailout, the foreign investment rules, the comparison with how Air India was handled, all of it points to deeper questions about policy and priorities. The contrast with Air India raised questions in the press about why one carrier was kept alive while another was left to fail. But these are open questions, not settled facts. No single political intervention has been shown to have caused Jet's collapse. What's clear is the structural pressure. The interpretation of who could have changed it remains a debate. The point that holds, though, is the one the whole story has been building toward. The mechanism that destroyed Jet wasn't unique to Jet. It was structural. So here's where we end. The airline that once owned nearly half of India's skies couldn't fund a single flight. It was grounded on the 17th of April, 2019, and after more than 5 years in court, the Supreme Court ended it for good on the 7th of November, 2024. And in a market still defined by thin margins, high fuel taxes, and ruthless low-cost competition, the real question isn't why Jet fell. It's whether the conditions that broke it have actually changed at all. Click here to subscribe and check out another video.